Senate will come to order. Senator Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Majors, please call the roll.
Senators Aguilar, Baumgardner, Carroll, Cook, Crowder, Donovan, Garcia, Grantham, Guzman, Heath, Hill, Hodge, Holbert, Johnston,
Excused.
Jones, Kafalis, Kerr, Lambert, Lundberg, Marble,
Absent.
Martinez Jimenez, Martinez Jimenez,
Absent.
Merrifield, Neville,
Excused.
Newell, Roberts, Scheffel, Scott, Sonnenberg,
Excused.
Stedman, Tate, Todd, Ulibarri, Woods, Marble,
Hang on a second.
Mr. President.
Here. With 31 present, 1 absent, 3 excused, we have a quorum. Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the reading of the journal from Friday, March 4th be dispensed with and that it be accepted as amended by the Secretary of the Senate.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is approved. The journal is adopted. Reports of committees of reference.
March 3rd, 2016, Mr. President, the Committee on Health and Human Services had in consideration of that hearing on the following appointments, recommends the appointments be placed on the consent calendar and confirmed. Members of the Solid and Hazardous Waste Commission for terms expiring August 1st, 2018, Michael K. Dempsey of Aurora, Colorado, serves as a representative from the regulated community and as a Republican reappointed. Charlotte Sophia Pitt of Denver, Colorado, serves as a representative of the government or academic community and as a Democrat reappointed. Joseph Charles Princer Jr. of Boulder, Colorado, serves as a member of the public and as a Republican reappointed. March 3rd, 2016, Committee on Local Government, after consideration of the Mayor's Committee, recommends the following: House Bill 1046 be amended as follows, and as so amended before the Committee of the Whole, favorable recommendation, with the recommendation be placed on the consent calendar. March 4, 2016, Committee on Legislative Council, after consideration of the Mayor's Committee, recommends the following: House Bill 1139 be amended as follows, and as so amended before the Committee of the Whole, favorable recommendation.
Please add Senator Martinez Jimenez to the roll. Senate Services.
March 7, 2016, quickly printed, Senate Bills 136, 137, 138, 139, 140, 141, 142, 143, 144, 145, 146, 147, 148, 149, 150, Senate Joint Resolutions 13 and 14, correctly revised House Bill 1119, correctly revised House Bill 1017, correctly enrolled Senate Joint Resolution 12.
Message from the House.
March 4, 2016, Mr. President, the House has passed on third reading and transferred the advisory statutes, House Bill 1190. The House has passed on third reading and transferred the advisory statutes, House Bill 1185 as amended, House Bill 1149 as amended, House Bill 1136 as amended, House Bill 1165 as amended, House Bill 1093 as amended. The House has passed on third reading and returns herewith Senate Bill 107. The House has voted to concur in the Senate amendments to House Bills 1125, 1130, and has repassed the bills as so amended.
Message from the Reviser.
March 4, 2016, we herewith transmit without comment House Bill 1190, without comment as amended, House Bills 1093, 1136, 1149, 1165, and 1185.
Third reading of bills consent calendar. Majority Leader Scheffel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move at this time that the Senate proceed out of order for purposes of hearing Senate Resolution 2.
The motion is to proceed out of order. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate will proceed out of order for the consideration of resolutions. Mr. Majors, would you please read the title of Senate Resolution 2?
Senate Resolution 2 by Senator Woods concerning restoring the presumption of service connection for Agent Orange exposure for United States Vietnam veterans through the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2015.
Senator Woods.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Resolution 16-002 and ask that it be read at length.
Whereas, during the Vietnam War, the United States military sprayed approximately 22 million gallons of Agent Orange and other herbicides over the Republic of Vietnam to reduce forest cover and crops used by the enemy. And whereas these herbicides contain dioxin, which has since been identified as a carcinogenic and has been linked to a number of serious and disabling illnesses affecting thousands of veterans. And whereas the United States Congress passed the Federal Agent Orange Act of 1991 to address the plight of veterans exposed to herbicides while serving in the Republic of Vietnam, which amended Title 38 of the United States Code to presumptively recognize as service-connected certain diseases among military personnel who served in Vietnam between 1962 and 1975. And whereas the presumptive status provides expedited claims processing for access to appropriate disability compensation and medical care for Vietnam veterans diagnosed with such illnesses as type 2 diabetes, Hodgkin's disease, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, prostate cancer, Parkinson's disease, multiple myeloma, peripheral neuropathy, AL amyloidosis, respiratory cancers, soft tissue carcinomas, and other diseases yet to be identified. And whereas the United States Department of Veterans Affairs Claims Adjudication Manual, more commonly known as the M21 TAC 1 Manual, originally allowed the presumption to be extended to all veterans who had received the Vietnam Service Medal. And whereas in a February 2002 revision to the M21 TAC 1 Manual, the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, added a requirement that the veteran prove that he or she had set foot on the land or entered an internal river or stream, which means that since 2002, the VA has denied the presumption of a service connection for herbicide-related illnesses to Vietnam veterans who served in the waters off of the Vietnamese coast or in bays and harbors who cannot furnish documentation that they had boots on the ground in country, making it virtually impossible for countless United States Navy and Marine veterans to acquire VA benefits. And whereas personnel who served on ships in the Blue Water Navy in Vietnamese territorial waters were, in fact, exposed to dangerous airborne and waterborne toxins that did not merely drift offshore in the air, but also washed into the streams and rivers draining into the South China Sea. And whereas warships positioned off the Vietnamese shore routinely distilled seawater to obtain potable water, and a 2002 Australian study found that the distillation process, rather than removing toxins, concentrated and enhanced dioxin in water used for drinking, cooking, and washing. And whereas this study was conducted by the Australian Department of Veterans Affairs after it found Vietnam veterans of the Royal Australian Navy had a higher rate of mortality from Agent Orange-associated diseases than did Vietnam veterans from other branches of the military. And when the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention studied specific cancers among Vietnam veterans, it too found a higher incidence of certain cancers among United States Navy veterans. And whereas additional studies, including those conducted by the Institute of Medicine, show plausible pathways for Agent Orange to have entered the South China Sea via contaminated dirt and debris from rivers and streams. And whereas the 2009 Institute of Medicine U.S. Committee to Review the Health Effects in Vietnam Veterans of Exposure to Herbicides, 7th Biannual Update, recommended that veterans who served on ships off the coast of the Republic of Vietnam not be excluded from the presumption of exposure. And whereas herbicides containing TCDD dioxin did not discriminate between soldiers on the ground and sailors on ships offshore. And whereas House Resolution 969 and identical companion bill Senate 681, the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2015, were introduced respectively in the U.S. House of Representatives on March 6, 2015 by Representative Christopher Gibson and on March 19, 2015 by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand in the U.S. Senate. And whereas more than 30 national veteran service organizations support the Congressional House and Senate legislation entitled Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2015, and whereas various agencies of the federal government have recently demonstrated awareness of the hazards of Agent Orange exposure through participation and funding of the identification, contaminant, and mitigation of dioxin hotspots in Vietnam. And whereas the United States Congress should reaffirm the nation's commitment to the well-being of all of its veterans by directing the United States Department of Veterans Affairs to properly administer the Federal Agent Orange Act of 1991, and by passing House Resolution 969 and identical companion bill Senate 681, the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2015, under the presumption that herbicide exposure in the Republic of Vietnam includes service on the offshore waters. Now therefore be it resolved by the Senate of the 70th General Assembly of the State of Colorado that we, the members of the Senate of the Colorado General Assembly, hereby respectfully encourage the United States Congress to restore the presumption of service connection for Agent Orange exposure to United States veterans who served on the waters off the coast of the Republic of Vietnam. And be it further resolved that copies of this resolution be sent to President Barack Obama, Vice President and President of the Senate Joe Biden, Speaker of the House of Representatives Paul Ryan, Chairman of the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs in the House of Representatives, Chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, Chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, and to each member of the Colorado Congressional Delegation.
Colleagues, please be seated. Senator Woods.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues and honored guests, thank you for giving your attention to this important matter this morning. We are joined today in the chamber and in the gallery by Blue Water Navy Vietnam veterans. At the conclusion of this resolution, I will ask you to help me welcome them here to the Senate, but I wanted you to know they are here. Since our country was founded, we have sent soldiers to war as early as 1798. We started sending Americans overseas to protect America and our freedoms, to defend our allies, and to rid the world of dictators, criminals, communists, and terrorists. After the First and Second World Wars, the brave soldiers who'd gone overseas to fight were welcomed home with parades and rallies, with fanfare and appreciation. They are America's heroes, and we treated them with honor when they returned. Then came Vietnam. Our country was in a very different place, and some citizens protested the government's decision to send our soldiers to Vietnam. That right to protest, in fact, is one of the rights our soldiers had fought and died for in the early wars of our country. But for some, protest of the government turned into disdain for the soldiers. Our soldiers, our men and women, were not welcomed home. They were not treated as heroes. In my opinion, this was a very dark time in American history. As you heard in the resolution this morning, in 1991, Congress passed the Agent Orange Act, which addressed the plight of veterans impacted by toxic exposure in Vietnam between 62 and 75. Our government recognized these veterans were getting sick as a result of their service in Vietnam. But then, to add insult to injury, in 2002, some 11 years later, the VA changed the rules and determined that unless a soldier had boots on the ground in Vietnam and could prove it, they were no longer going to receive care for exposure to Agent Orange. It's as if the VA truly believes the chemicals sprayed over Vietnam didn't land in the rivers, didn't travel on a breeze into the ocean or onto the soldiers' food and water source. The military men and women who served in the submarines, on the Navy ships, and in our special forces out in the blue water know they were exposed to Agent Orange. The VA wants us to believe there was a magic wall around the border of Vietnam which contained all of the sprayed dioxin on the land. So in 2002, they started denying medical care and medical coverage to soldiers like these Blue Water Navy veterans. You're going to hear some testimonies of Blue Water Navy veterans and their families who are suffering from exposure to Agent Orange, just as their in-country brothers in arms who served on land are. So I'll turn the mic over to some of my colleagues to speak, and then we'll welcome them all here.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the first things we have to do is understand the absurdity of this issue. When a Navy ship was tied to a pier in a Vietnamese harbor and a sailor did not stand on the pier or shore, he is denied VA benefits for any Agent Orange disease he later develops. This denial happens even if the harbor was surrounded on 3 sides by land. However, if a shipmate disembarked and stood on the pier, that shipmate on the pier is given full presumption of exposure and all benefits. Meanwhile, the sailor who stayed on board the ship only 2 to 5 feet away is denied the presumption of exposure and receives none of the benefits. The difference between the blue and brown water veterans, it is important to note the difference between blue and brown water sailors. Brown water refers to ships that served within the geographical boundaries of Vietnam, and blue water sailors served only offshore of Vietnam. Brown sailors were on the rivers and tributaries. Blue water sailors were on the open ocean and in the harbors and along the borders of Vietnam.
Is there further discussion? Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to start out by telling you how, kind of a brief story. I'm connected with the American Legion in Alamos, and what we do, we would do a lot of funerals. And at these funerals, what you do is you present the flag. And what you do is you basically say, on behalf of the President of the United States and veteran service groups throughout the country, we would like to present this to the family of the fallen veteran. And then what we do is we take that flag and we give it to the spouse or the family member, and then we salute them. And when we salute them, we say, "From a grateful nation." And that's the point I'm trying to make, from a grateful nation. I am a Vietnam veteran myself. I'm in the United States Army. It's too bad we cannot put on here the emphasis on how upsetting this is to have to run this, because the reality is the Blue Water veterans have as much right to presumptive as anybody on land or brown water. And this should have never been taken off in 2002, and it should be put back on. There's enough evidence in place from the Australian government and from actually the South Korean government. You know, and it's a sad travesty when our own government does not recognize blue water. The reality of what blue water, the previous speaker told you the difference between blue and brown. Brown water was up in the waterways. You know, there were boots on the ground. The thing with blue water, as they sprayed this 22 million gallons of herbicide on the land, it all washed into the bays, the China Sea and whatnot. The ships that these guys represent, their water supply was taken out of the same bay that the dioxin was going in. And that's why they, you know, by all means, they should be getting this presumptive. Now, presumptive, basically what that does, and I was also a veteran service officer, what the presumptive does is basically the proof is laid in an act that nobody has to prove that they were. All they had to do was prove that they were on the ship in that bay at a certain time. But it's presumed that because they were on the ship, that they should qualify for benefits from the VA. And that's the difference between, that's what, the key word to this whole thing is presumptive. You know, I worked with it a lot, and the reality is, you know, you can put a claim in with the VA But without that presumptive, it makes it very difficult. And that's the problem we have with this. But the reality is, if we're going to talk from a grateful nation, this should be allocated to the Blue Water Navy also. And, you know, I just think it's a travesty that it's not. But, you know, the Navy has a very proud history in this country. And one of those things that I've learned recently, since I've been up here, is to the extent that we owe the United States Navy. In World War II, when they landed the beaches on Omaha and Normandy, it was a slaughterhouse out there for the military that was on the beach. So what the reality of what you had is you had the naval big ships that were outward, and their duty was basically to watch the backside, so nobody would fly in and bomb us. What these admirals did, they went against orders. They saw the carnage going on the beaches, and they actually motivated their ships in close to land and opened that up so the military could actually advance on land. So the reality is we owe so much to the United States Navy for what they did for the ground forces in World War II. But, you know, you know, right now we're looking at the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War coming up this summer. And I think, you know, part of that anniversary gift should be from the VA to actually enact this to be presumptive. But, you know, I would encourage any Blue Water to keep trying, to keep, you know, putting those claims in. You know, the reality is, what we're talking about on the claim, you have to have the disease before you put the claim in. You don't just put the claim in and not have a disease. So the care and benefits from the VA are essential to all veterans, especially the Vietnam veteran. And that may be an overstatement. It should be care for all veterans. But, you know, the homecoming was not that great back in the 70s when I got back. I was there in '69. But the reality of what we've done, a lot of us have not dwelled on the homecoming. What we've done is we've said, okay, we know what happened to us. We want to make sure it does not happen to the next group. And we've dedicated you know, our lives to make sure that the next group of veterans that come back from a war, popular or otherwise, are very welcomed in this country. You know, the veterans, you know, we owe everything that we have to the veteran. And I don't just say that idly, I mean it. But I do believe in this, Senate resolution, and I urge you to vote for it. And I'm really glad that the sponsor brought this forward. But, you know, it's not meant to be it's something that has to be done. And it's not, you know, we as Vietnam veterans should not have to beg for anything. You know, what we're talking about is from a grateful nation. And that's what we expect, and that's what we demand. We demand all the rights that all the other veterans have. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And Blue Water, guys, hoo-yah.
Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of Senate Resolution 002 and thank the sponsor very much for bringing this forward. A couple of years ago, in fact, maybe it was last year, that the first Agent Orange resolution came forward, and I spoke on my cousin Jim Resch from Emporia, Kansas, who lost his life to Agent Orange. And this was really informative. I appreciate very much learning more and salute and support our veterans that are with us today. I think one of the things that has taken our nation a lot longer than it should have is how we salute the families who lose their veteran family member years after they served. We have the Vietnam Wall, and that is for those who lost their life on the ground or in the waters of Vietnam during that period of time. But they have recently started something called the Rose Ceremony, and I don't know if all of the veterans that are in the room are aware of that, but it was so very meaningful to my cousin's family to be able to go, and they are starting to recognize and to honor veterans who have lost their lives due to the infiltration of Agent Orange and the effects of that. And it doesn't happen maybe the first year they're home or the second year. Sponsor for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Senator Newell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I wanted to rise in support of this as well. It's more intimate to me. My former husband was a victim and survivor of Agent Orange, and he has ended up with congestive heart failure, has been a disabled veteran for many years, and he lost his first child, who died at 4 days old due to Agent Orange. So it is up close and personal for me, and I'm grateful that this is happening today, that we are more conscious of it. What is the saddest comment to me, though, is that the United States military did this to the United States military. And I am hoping that we have all learned a lesson in looking very proactively before we take on certain actions in the theater before it happens to any of the individuals. Thank you.
Senator Heath.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I too rise in support of this resolution. And I've had an occasion to talk about this a number of times now, and over the 8 years that I've been here. As another one of the persons who served during this period. It brings back a lot of really terrible memories. As I know you've heard me tell the story of the aviators who were people that served in Vietnam, suffered when they returned. Is something that I know this country still lives with. And all of the conversations around what we've done in Afghanistan and Iran and all of the other things, subsequent events since Vietnam, the pall of Vietnam extends to all of those. So I think it's always worthwhile just to sit back and remember. I went to the University of Wisconsin in 1968. Actually, when I was in Germany, when we were in Vietnam, they blew up the math building on that campus just to illustrate how far this went. So it's a good time to sit back and remember. Hopefully we learn from history. And thank you, and thanks to all of those that served, and certainly what we need to do for our Blue Water folks. I certainly support that, but I think we need to just remind ourselves of this time and this country and what it meant, and then how pervasive it is in today as we try to deal with all of the things and the events that are happening in the world today. Thank you.
Senator Martinez-Humanic.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too rise in support of this, and I wanted to read something that was provided. Navy ships during the Vietnam era took in ocean water, ran it through a desalination procedure, and used it for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and bathing. Agent Orange flowed from the inland rivers and streams out to the ocean. The Agent Orange sprayed in the air also drifted with the wind into the ocean. When a ship collected water for in-ship use, the Agent Orange mixed with fuel oil, and it would coat the inside of the drinking system pipes and tanks within the ship. So all the water became polluted with Agent Orange. Every sailor on the ship was exposed and contaminated by Agent Orange, whether they stepped foot on land or not. According to the Agent Orange Act of 1991, anyone that qualifies for presumptive status should only have to provide a statement that they were one of the ones who went ashore. End of story. However, the VA keeps asking our veterans to prove that they went ashore and are denying coverage for those out in the contaminated blue water. Just simply not right. As one USS, and I hope I don't massacre this name, Ponchatoula sailor paraphrased Kenny Rogers from a song, "It wasn't us who started that crazy Asian war, still we proudly went and did our patriotic duty and did our patriotic shore. We Ponchatoula guys have to stick together. There will never be any more of us." And it's a shame that our Vietnam veterans were treated the way they were when they came home from the war, because they fought for our rights and freedoms that all of us sitting in this room have a right to every single day.
Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of this resolution as well. I have a couple of observations. You know, if you go to an airport today and you see members of the military flying to and from different cities, most often they're in uniform, and most often you compliment them and thank them for their service, and there's a real high regard and respect for who they are and what they're doing. I remember back in the days of Vietnam, it was quite different, and most remarkably, I saw this when my father and I, it was in the late 60s, I think I was in high school, my father and I went out to then Stapleton Airport to welcome back and pick up a cousin who had just completed his tour in Vietnam. And it was such a stark difference than what we see today, because we met him at the gate. Well, right there, that's a difference. We don't meet anybody at the gate. But we met him at the gate, and there was no fanfare. It was just the two of us saying, welcome back. He was not in uniform. He was in civilian clothes. And he, you know, rather quietly walked with us out of the airport, and he said, the first thing I want to do is find a dentist to get my teeth cleaned. And a couple of things here. One is, he said anybody who was over in Vietnam had this black deposit that developed around their teeth because of the quality of the water. And he said, I don't want to be seen as somebody who just came back from Vietnam. He just wanted to bury that and just walk away from it as quickly as possible. And that's struck me as being just so wrong. And also note, though, that was the quality of the water. That was just a reality of what everybody endured. And the presence of these toxins from the Agent Orange was quite apparent. And the second thing I have today is a story from a Navy Blue Water veteran from Vietnam. And it's written in first person. It goes this way. My name is Tom. I have an appeal coming up in the next few months stating that heavy smoke from fires on land covered the ship. Brownwater sailors would tie up to our jungle deck while we were in market time, and they'd shower and eat, then get back on their boats and leave. I had lunch with one of these guys and asked about where all the smoke was coming from. He answered saying, planes sprayed the jungle, and after the jungle died and dried, planes would then drop incendiaries and burn the jungle. Our ship sailed through heavy smoke, many times heavier than what it would take to blot out the sun. The VA's own literature says if you burn material exposed to herbicide, burning it releases it back into the smoke and the ash. All that said, they have ignored anything about smoke and Agent Orange. This is my second appeal, and I have a chance to introduce new evidence. If you have anything I can add, I'd love to present it to those hard-of-hearing good old boys.
Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, rise in support of resolution number 2. I want to thank the senator for Jefferson County for making this happen. I'm really simply going to read a statement from a Vietnam Blue Water veteran. Quote, I am fighting my third stage 4 cancer. One of my latest doctors was really grilling me about Agent Orange on our ship and if I was ever in country. I told him I never set foot in country, but that I do remember the barrels we stored on deck. Having worked in the petroleum industry prior to enlistment, I spotted strange markings on the barrels and knew to stay away. Is there any update on the Blue Water Navy bill? Thank you.
Senator Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too rise in support of SR 2. At 55, I'm part of a generation that I believe was the first to watch war on the evening news. My father was press secretary for the Secretary of Interior in 1969 under President Nixon, so watching the evening news was something that my family was somewhat required to do. War was not something that we idolized in movies. It was real. To see the bombing runs and different action in Vietnam on the evening news and people like Walter Cronkite relating the reality of war, I believe that that was very different for my generation. I remember older brothers being drafted or enlisting, cousins. Again, as a perspective of a child, it wasn't fathers so much, but cousins and older brothers. I have a testimony here from David, who served on the USS Ponchatoula. David states, "I've been under the weather with chemo. I feel weak all the time. Seems I'm losing my strength. I finally heard from the VA and was classified as 100% disabled. It's a shame that the VA has taken so long to approve my case. For my wife's sake, I'm thankful it was approved. Seems my illness is only worth about $3,000 a month to the VA at 100% disabled. Very sad that that's all my life is worth to the VA." To David and others who served on the Ponchatoula and in the war in Vietnam, your worth is far greater than that in the eyes of this child of the late 60s and early 70s. God bless you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Grantham.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also rise in support of SR 002. I also have a testimony here from another Vietnam Blue Water veteran. It says, "I served aboard the USS Ponchatoula from August 69 to December 71. I am currently filing paperwork with the VA for disability with Agent Orange exposure. I have been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The Ponchatoula is on the list of ships for presumptive disability for being in the Mekong Delta in July of 71. I was on board on this cruise. I would like to know if you have or could supply me with the ship's roster so I could prove to the VA that I was aboard at that time. I was in Fox Division. As you know, the VA is difficult to deal with, and I would appreciate any help you can give me. Thank you." It's remarkable that even now we still have those calling out for help. After all this time, I don't have a name on this particular veteran, but knowing what some of these veterans have gone through, someone in particular that I know down in Canyon City that passed away just a few years ago, Vietnam veteran who suffered from the ravages of cancer due to his exposure to Agent Orange, the difficulties that he had in dealing with the VA, trying to prove the connection when I think to most of us it might seem rather obvious. My hat's off to all of our veterans and the things that they have endured, and our Vietnam veterans. Thank you for everything that you have done for us.
Senator Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. President. From my years in service, I'd like to just add a little other context to this. When I was at the Air Force Academy, during this period of time, I did not serve in Vietnam, but I got to the Academy in 1970, certainly studied what was going on in Vietnam. If your upperclassmen didn't realize you didn't know everything about everything that was going on, then you'd get in trouble. So we had to study it pretty hard. At that time, the Air Force was conducting operations called Operation Ranch Hand, and typically would use formations of 3 C-130s, which are very much like the C-130s we have here in Colorado that fight forest fires. And it's sort of the same idea. Instead of using them as slurry bombers, they would put Agent Orange in special tanks and spray them at pretty low level start the process of defoliating jungle canopies. And that went on for a number of years. To put that into context, this is not the only problem our armed forces have had with environmental health issues. All the way back in World War II, when we were landing on the Anzio beachhead, there was a ship that came in loaded with mustard gas. The United States never used mustard gas in World War II, but there was a concern that if the Germans or the Italians used that in the theater, that we would have to respond in kind. Unfortunately, the only casualties of mustard gas that I know of in World War II was when that ship in Anzio Harbor blew up and killed about, I think it was about 350 men in that harbor. A lot of them were stevedores. Most of those were black units that were being used to transport the cargo on and off those ships. But it was a tragic accident. I can't remember if it was due to enemy fire or if, bombing, or if it was just an explosion on the ship. I think it was actually due to German fire. But it got out of hand. You may recall in the Gulf War, first Gulf War, that Saddam Hussein, knowing that he was losing ground, set fire to oil wells throughout that region. And we have had a number of veterans that have had very similar types of environmental diseases or syndromes resulting from that kind of environmental exposure. We did nuclear testing and exposed people, sometimes involuntarily, to low levels of nuclear radiation. And I have to say, as an Air Force analyst through a lot of my career, it is very difficult for any professionals, whether they're medical, whether they're mathematicians or whatever, to actually identify what the effects of environmental syndromes or environmental diseases are going to be. You don't know when they're going to happen. Our medical officers, our doctors, will diagnose patient by patient, and only when there is a vast amount of evidence over a statistically significant number of people can they put these clues together as to what actually happened. And I think that was the case in the experience with Agent Orange and some other Gulf War syndrome. You've heard these types of nicknames because it's difficult to diagnose. It's difficult to categorize. But we know in the case of Agent Orange, we pretty well know that this is a cause and effect relationship. On a personal level, one of my best friends in my hometown, lived next door to my mother for many, many decades, was in Vietnam, was a victim of Agent Orange, and has suffered with that syndrome and that malady for decades. It has really ruined his life, and he went through years and years of the process of trying to be diagnosed, trying to apply for VA benefits, many times only to be turned down. As a part of a larger problem, the way we treat our veterans, especially those that are now seeking medical help, is really a national shame. I don't have the latest statistics. I know we still have not met our goals in the registration and the processing of claims in the Veteran Administration, but I know, I think in 2013 it hit a high in terms of the casualty claims backlog at over 600,000 claims that had not been processed. We have probably hundreds of thousands of people yet, veterans, who are dying before they can even apply for VA benefits. They put in their application, it's not processed for a year or 18 months, and not only are they denied the benefits, they're denied even the registration into the VA. what we're hearing today in Resolution 2 is a symptom of a larger problem that I hope we will see as an educational opportunity to understand that our constituents, our fellow Americans, our citizens who've served in the armed forces have largely been forgotten. And I thank you, Senator, for bringing this resolution forward. And I ask for your aye vote on Senate Resolution 2.
Senator Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of 16002 and thank the sponsor very much. Like most people in this room, I was too young to serve during Vietnam. However, several years later, my junior year of college, I felt the calling, and I got up from my dorm room and I went down and I enlisted in the Colorado Army National Guard, where I proudly served for 6 years. But over half of our unit strength were made up of prior service people, and those were from Vietnam. They did their duty overseas, and then they came home and continued to do their duty as members of the Colorado Guard. They wanted to serve their country even more and their state. A finer group of guys you'd ever meet. They were proud, they were duty-bound, and they were heroes. Unfortunately, they weren't treated as heroes when they came back, which, as a good senator from Colorado Springs said, is a national disgrace. Well, now we have the opportunity to do that, do something about that. We need to change that. And so I would like to read this from a wife and caregiver of an Agent Orange exposed blue water Navy veteran. My husband was on the Ponchatoula on those dates given in 1969 and did go ashore into the Antoy Naval Base. Why does the VA see it so easy to reject his claim if they know he was aboard the USS Ponchatoula on that given month and year? My husband is dying from exposure to Agent Orange, multiple myeloma. Doctors have told us there is no cure for this illness. It's just a matter of time before he is taken from me. The VA has known for years about this exposure, but they continue to deny any claim. We need hard documents showing his ship was present there in Vietnam in 1969 when he was aboard the USS Ponchatoula. Just writing it on a piece of paper does not seem enough. I am very desperate. Our bills for his medical care are in the thousands, and I feel the VA needs to pay for all these bills before we lose our home.
Majority Leader Scheffel.
Thank you, Madam President. And I too rise in support of Senate Resolution 2. It's always special when we do resolutions like this. You can tell with the tone of this place when a particular topic resonates across this entire floor. This place almost takes on a cathedral-like quality, and I think that's what we're experiencing today. It strikes me, and so I want to thank the good senator from Jefferson County for your diligent work in putting this together. Well done. We obviously come together to honor our veterans again, and we do that. So the words "thank you for your service" seem to ring hollow, as inadequate, but it's important that we say them. And so thank you. Important that we continue to, with that steady drumbeat of thanks, recognition. But as if we heard these stories, powerful, powerful stories, there's another element to them that just seems sad and almost tragic. And you hear the drumbeat of, why does the VA not recognize our story? The reference to those old boys who don't hear so good, or do you have any other information that could maybe help me make my case? What a tragic commentary. As was commented, this is us turning on ourselves and not doing what's right. So it's important that we do this. Sometimes we reflect on these things and we wonder, okay, here we are, one of 50, and we're taking time to do this. We all know our schedule. We all know how busy it is. We all see the calendar and say, man, we got a lot of things to do. But how appropriate it is that we slow the boat down, that we take the time, that we do the appropriate honoring that needs to be done here, and maybe send a message, because that's what's at the conclusion of this resolution, a message to the folks outside of Colorado that says, hey, hear our voice. Hear the voice of the people that have taken the time to come to this building and sit in our perimeter and make themselves known and seen and heard. Important that we recognize them and send that message to folks outside of Colorado and say, hey, you need to listen. You need to hear these stories. We've heard them here in Colorado. Please listen to them so that the tragic commentary on our agencies out of Washington is not, boy, I wish they heard us more. I wish they recognized. I wish they would do something. So in addition to the honoring that's gone on today, I hope that voice goes forth from this place and really serves as a continuing ripple. If you see the analogy to water, that it might grow larger and larger and larger until those voices are heard, until something is done, until these diseases and the ramifications and the consequences are heard, that appropriate redress is afforded to those that so richly deserve it. It's an honor to be in this place, an honor to participate in this resolution.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I'd like to thank the senator from Jefferson County that brought this resolution. I'd also like to thank the Blue Water Sailors that are here today. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for the time that you spent there in that country, defending our country. I've got a story from someone here that we all know, one way or another. We are all connected to this individual. And I wanted to read it. It's a personal story from him that says, I really appreciate the introduction of the resolution concerning Blue Water Sailors. I am one of those folks impacted by the government's arbitrary decision to exclude us from the Agent Orange-related health problems. By way of background, I was damage control officer on the USS Kilauea, AE-26, from 1969 to 1972. The Kilauea was an ammunition ship, but also supplied over other ships with food, oil, jet fuel, etc. During that time, we were deployed to the South China Sea and Vietnam War zone for a total of more than 24 months on 2 separate deployments. Our primary mission was to rearm aircraft carriers, usually with 500-pound and 1,000-pound bombs, and destroyers and cruisers with 5- and 8-inch shells. To accomplish our mission, we cruised a couple of miles off the coast of Vietnam, usually for about 4 to 6 weeks at a time, rearming the carriers at night for daylight bombing runs and destroyers and cruisers during the daylight hours for offshore bombardment at night. Because of our proximity to land, I remember well seeing the pockmarked landscape where Agent Orange had been used for defoliation of the jungle. Because the Kilauea was more than 700 foot long and about 22,000 pounds displaced and 30-foot draft, we couldn't enter into the brown water of Vietnam, but we certainly were within several miles of the coastline for weeks at a time. And being a self-sufficient U.S. Navy ship, we were making our own drinking water, cooking and bathing water from the seawater contaminated with Agent Orange. Beginning in about 1987, I began regular visits to the dermatologist for skin cancer and related issues. For nearly 25 years, I was on a 3-month appointment schedule. For the last couple of years, I've been on a every other month schedule, and just recently, I went to a once-a-month schedule. I routinely have between 5 and 10 biopsies every year Luckily, they have all come back either squamous cell or basal cell cancer with no melanoma. I have had numerous skin cancer surgeries over the years. Also in 2007, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer and a successful prostatectomy. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. The doctor will help me do that later. Skin cancer and prostate cancer seem to be one of the diseases that is the main cancer caused by the exposure of Agent Orange. I have made several claims to the VA about the cancers, all supported by the statements from the dermatologist and my urologist, and have been told by the VA that because I was never in Brown Water Navy, I don't qualify for any of the treatment, benefits, or other rights related to the cancer. For my hearing loss and being near the naval guns, being in the flight deck safety officer, and in the engine room of the ship, for that matter. I wish you well on the success of the resolution and appreciate your efforts on my behalf. Thank you very much, Danny Tomlinson. I spoke with Danny several times on this issue. If you can't prove that you were on the shore of Vietnam, which many of these individuals that are here today, they did leave the ship. They flew supplies inland on helicopters, flew supplies back. There was actual pictures taken of them standing on the ground, and the VA says, that doesn't prove anything. You can't prove that where that picture was taken. So there are some individuals that has been dismissed that should not be dismissed. Again, I wanted to thank all of you that's here this morning, and I stand in support of SJR 2.
Senator Woods.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, I have another story that I want to share with you this morning, and this story is about a gentleman who's here today with his son. One of our honored guests is Joe. His son is Richard. Joe's a Vietnam veteran who served as a helicopter crewman, mechanic, and gunner in Vietnam on a Marine Corps helicopter, the H-34, in 1964. He re-enlisted for Army Flight School in '66, graduating in May of '67, and starting in September of '67, he served in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot for the Army. He logged somewhere between 500 and 600 hours of flight time in the Army. When flying gunships, he made gun runs at treetop level and flew near all kinds of places that had been sprayed with Agent Orange. He and his Army crew supported the river gunboats on the tributaries and the rivers of Vietnam. He was considered Brown Water Navy. Now, currently, Joe has no known disease or problems from Agent Orange exposure. It appears that burden has been passed on to his beloved son, Richard. Richard is here this morning. He would enjoy meeting each and every one of you. Richard has 34 different abnormalities, some from birth, others manifesting throughout his life. The abnormalities are extreme, affecting his brain, his facial structure, his lungs, his kidneys, his GI tract, his joints, his genitals. He's unable to speak, he has seizures, and he is blind. But despite all of this, he's a good man, he's a happy man, and he has purpose to his life. The VA denies coverage for the children of the men who served in Vietnam, but they allow coverage of the women's children, women who served there. If their children are born with birth defects, they're covered, but not the men's children. Again, it's another travesty dished to our soldiers. Thank you.
President Cadman.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for joining us today, and I want to thank the sponsor for running this resolution. As the good senator from Douglas County mentioned, there are some of us around 55 years old here who were kids when Vietnam was happening. My dad was in Vietnam. Many of you have met my dad. Those who didn't meet him probably heard about him here a couple times during a couple debates. And there's certainly a lot more people that have now read about him from some of the stories that I've shared over the years. To say my dad has a temper is an understatement. And I know I've shared the characteristics of that and what it meant on my family, but what I haven't shared many times was my dad was also in the Navy in Vietnam in the late 60s. And I remember those days. It was strange. You're 9 years old. You think the war is never going to end because it's on TV every day. Your neighbors aren't coming home. A very good friend didn't come home. And you're only 9 or 10. My brother was a couple years older, and we just kept thinking, oh, we're going to enlist in a few years because it seemed like it was never going to end for us. The war was so bad for my dad. The photos he took, he still won't show me, and I'm well past the age that he served. He was an aviation mechanic, an aircraft mechanic, a helicopter mechanic, and he was on those ships, and he was also on land. He was the one that was tasked with repairing the helicopters so quickly they didn't have time to clean them out. They literally used a squeegee, and then they started repairing them so they could get them back into service. Most of them were medevacs. He suffers, he complains. I mentioned his temper. Mostly, he has it under control until you mention those two letters together, V and A. If you say VA, you better hold the phone away from your head, and it's deserved. I just want to take this opportunity to share the good side of my dad, because there's a lot to him that I haven't shared. The good side was that he served. The good side for us was that he did come home. The good side is he still fights for the causes he believes in, and he's almost 80, and he has colleagues that he helps that are suffering. A few weeks ago, I made headlines with 4 simple words. I said, Congress, do your job. And within minutes, it was like that was the shot heard around the world. Different issue, somewhat controversial. I stand by it. Congress, do your job. And I think about Congress failing us. I think about that monument to failure of a veterans hospital has yet to serve a veteran. Has yet to serve a veteran. We're failing those who didn't fail to serve us. I want to thank the senator from Boulder for sharing, because as you shared, I thought about my dad, and it compelled me to come here and share. I haven't had as many opportunities to thank my dad for what he's done. I'm going to take that now. And all of you, maybe some of you served with him. I think it's time, I hope this makes headlines. I think it's time for Congress to do their job, and I want to thank all of our veterans for doing your job.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Woods.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, colleagues. I renew my motion for the adoption of Senate Resolution 002.
The motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Resolution 2. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. Are there any no votes? It is a recorded vote. Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Resolution 2. It is passed. Senator Woods.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask for the use of the morning roll call as sponsors.
Any objection? Seeing none, the morning roll call will be adopted as co-sponsors. Senator Woods.
I'm almost done, Madam President. Thank you. Colleagues, there is a rally today between 11 and 1 on the west steps of the Capitol. We've invited all Vietnam veterans to come to the Capitol today, not just the Blue Water Navy veterans, but they will be out there, and they would love to have you stop out if we get out of here in time, if you've got time between now and your next committee, so on the west steps. Thank you.
Colleagues, we'll take a brief recess. We want to ask our guests to please stand so we can recognize them. We'll stand in a brief recess.
The Senate will come back to order. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I move that the Senate proceed out of order for purposes of hearing a tribute presented by Senator Crowder.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate will proceed out of order. Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's quite a day for delight. What we have here is some Colorado Nurse Association, and what I have is a tribute for them. I do believe they are the centerstone of our medical field, and I think they are a huge advocate for health care in the state of Colorado. And I would like to just read this tribute if I could. State of Colorado, Senate and House Representatives convene on the second regular session on the 70th General Assembly. Hereby extends heartiest congratulations and commendation to the Colorado Nurse Association. The members of the Colorado General Assembly recognize the critical role nurses play in providing safe, high-quality, and preventative health care. Colorado nurses are the cornerstone of the state's health care system, representing the largest single component of the health care profession. With an estimated 50,000 registered nurses in the state, these professionals improve the health and safety of all Colorado residents through their dedication to serving others. We appreciate the significant contributions of registered nurses to our health care system and commend them for their dedication to caring for the people of the state of Colorado. On request from Senator Larry Crowder and Representative Diana Primavera, given this 7th day of March 2016 at the state capitol, Denver, Colorado. Signed, President of the Senate Bill Cadman. Signed, Speaker of the House of Representatives Dickie Lee Hollingshorst. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join with me in greeting some of our CNA nurses from the state of Colorado. And ladies and gentlemen, we have some on top too. Well, thank you very much, Mr. President and Senate.
Thank you, Senator. I understand they have agreed to stay with us for the next 65 days, so we appreciate having you for the remainder of the session. I think we're going to feel a lot better. Committee reports.
March 3rd, 2016, Committee on Education, after consideration of the Mayor's Committee recommends following House Bill 1144 be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation. March 3rd, 2016, Committee on Education, after consideration of the Mayor's Committee recommends following House Bill 1082 be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation with the recommendation be placed on the consent calendar. March 3rd, 2016, Committee on Education, after consideration of the Mayor's Committee recommends following Senate Bill 104 be amended as follows and as amended before the Committee on Appropriations with favorable recommendation. March 3rd, 2016, Committee on Education, after consideration of the Mayor's Committee recommends following House Bill 1083 be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation with the recommendation be placed on the consent calendar.
Third reading of bills consent calendar. Mr. Majors, would you please read the title of the bill on the third reading of bills consent calendar?
House Bill 1119 by Representative Thurlow and Senator Holbrook concerning a modification of the number of days that an aircraft may remain in the state after its purchase for purposes of the sales and use tax exemption on the purchase of certain aircraft.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adopt the bills listed on the third reading of bills for final passage consent calendar, which includes one bill, House Bill 1119.
You have heard the motion. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, are there any no votes? With 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 3 excused, House Bill 1119 is adopted. Co-sponsors, Mr. Majority Leader, Senator Grantham, Senator Heath, Senator Crowder, Senator Merrifield, Senator Scott, Senator Todd, Senator Woods, Senator Hodge, Senator Lambert, Senator John, Senator Baumgardner, Senator Cook, Senator Lundberg, Senator Marble, Senator Martinez Humenick, Senator Tate, please have the President. General orders, second reading of bills, consent calendar. Senator Martinez Humenick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for consideration of the general orders, second reading of bills, consent calendar.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate will resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for the consideration of general orders, second reading of bills, consent calendar. Senator Senator Martinez Humenick will take the chair.
The committee will come to order and the court rule is relaxed. Mr. Majors, would you please read the titles to all the bills listed on the consent calendar?
House Bill 1051 by Representative Van Wiegel and Senator Holmberg concerning the issuance of beneficiary designation forms to facilitate the transfer of ownership of a vehicle upon the death of an owner. Senate Bill 85 by Senator Stedman concerning the Colorado Uniform Trust Decanting Act. Senate Bill 126 by Senator Roberts, Representatives Gardner and Nordberg concerning parity with state chartered banks and federal chartered banks regarding frequency of meetings. House Bill 1064 by Representative Brown, Senator Roberts concerning local licensing of medical marijuana testing facilities. Senate Bill 135 by Senator Aguilar and Representative Janal concerning pharmacist provision of healthcare services that have been delegated by another healthcare provider. House Bill 1081 by Representatives Thurlow and Mishbush and Senator Sonnenberg concerning change the biennial filing date for rate-regulated electric utilities to submit their plans for transmission facilities to the Public Utilities Commission in connection therewith, deleting the requirement that the Commission issue a final order within 180 days after an application for the construction or expansion of transmission facilities is filed.
Majority Leader Shuffle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This time I move that the committee adopt all the bills listed on the general order second reading of bills consent calendar, which includes House Bill 1051, Senate Bill 85, Senate Bill 126 and its associated Business, Labor, and Technology Report, House Bill 1064, Senate Bill 135 and its associated Health and Human Services Committee Report, and House Bill 1091. Ask for an aye vote.
Is there any discussion on any of the committee reports? The motion before the body is the adoption of all reports to all the bills on the general orders second reading of bills consent calendar. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the reports are adopted. Is there any discussion on any of the bills listed on the general orders consent calendar? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of all the bills on the general orders second reading of bills consent calendar. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bills are adopted. Majority Leader Shuffle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Move the committee rise and report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. The committee will rise and report.
The Senate will come back to order. Senator Martinez-Humenick.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee has met and had a number of bills under considerations. Mr. Majors, would you please read the report?
March 7, 2016, Mr. President, the committee whole brings the reports under consideration of the following attached bills being second reading thereof makes following recommendations thereon. Senate Bill 85, Senate Bill 126 as amended, Senate Bill 135 as amended, passed on second reading in order and engrossed to place on the counter for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1051, House Bill 1064, and House Bill 1091 passed on second reading in order to revised and placed on the counter for third reading and final passage.
Senator Martinez-Humenick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the adoption of the report.
You've heard the motion. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, are there any no votes? With 32 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 3 excused, the report of the Committee of the Whole is adopted. Senate Bill 85, Senate Bill 126 as amended, Senate Bill 135 as amended, passed on second reading and ordered engrossed and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1051, House Bill 1064, House Bill 1091 passed on second reading and ordered revised and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. General orders, second reading of bills. Majority Leader Shuffle.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I move that the Senate lay over the general order second reading of bills calendar to March 8.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The general orders second reading of bills calendar will lay over until March 8th. Consideration of resolutions. Majority Leader Shuffle.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move that the remaining resolutions on the consideration of resolutions calendar, which consists of 2, Senate Joint Resolution 11 and Senate Joint Resolution 14, lay over to March 8.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Senate Joint Resolution 11 and Senate Joint Resolution 14 will lay over until March 8th. Consideration of governor's appointments, consent calendar. Mr. Majors, would you please read the appointments?
Members of the Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority for term expiring October 1st, 2019. Michael Jude Berry of Montrose, Colorado, serves as a member from the Gunnison and Comparegua Drainage Basin and with experience in water planning and development, appointed. George Patrick Corkle of Walden, Colorado, serves as a member from the North Platte Drainage Basin, appointed. Steve Eric Vandiver of Alamosa, Colorado, serves as a member from the Rio Grande Drainage Basin, appointed.
Majority Leader Scheffel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate confirm the governor's appointments listed on the consideration of governor's appointments consent calendar, which includes members of the Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority.
You have heard the motion. Is there further discussion on any of the appointments? Seeing none, are there any no votes? With 32 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 3 excused, Michael Jude Berry, George Patrick Corkle, Stephen Eric Vandiver are appointed as Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority members. Signing of bills.
March 4, 2016, the President signed Senate Joint Resolution 12.
The following change in bill sponsorship will occur. Representative Vigil will replace Representative Humphrey as the joint prime sponsor on Senate Bill 62 with Representative Jay Becker and Senator Marble. Delivery to the governor.
To the governor for signature on Monday, March 7, 2016 at 9 o'clock a.m., Senate Bills 4, 9, 15, and 20.
Colleagues, please welcome Senator Entz to the chamber. This brings us to the most anticipated part of our program, announcements, and I have one to make before I recognize others. One of our own will be missing tomorrow. Please give it up for John McKay, who will make his first appearance at some point on Jeopardy tomorrow. He has asked that you bombard him with questions all day long. Whatever. We're not going to reformat it. Announcements. Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to let you know the CNA lunch is at the First Baptist Church across the street from 12 to 1. Thank you.
Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I have the sad task of letting you know that Senator Isgar passed away last Friday night. You might remember during announcements I mentioned that he was in pretty serious condition, but he did pass away Friday night. So unfortunately, we weren't able to get the card all the way around, and when we did, folks, he wrote messages as to him getting well. So we still want to get his family the card. So if you haven't had an opportunity to sign it, would very much appreciate that, and we'll make sure Brenda and his family get this. So thank you.
Colleagues, would you please join me in a moment of silence and respect, and we will sound the chimes out of respect for our fallen colleague. Thank you, colleagues. Further announcements. Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. President, and want to encourage all of you, this was on your desk again, for the Colorado Lunch and Learn Seminar. We have 3 expert doctors that will be joining us in room 356 today. One is from, from Regis, Dr. Baum, and he is dealing with physical therapy. And Dr. Richard Bowen, who is a professor at the Animal Reproduction and Biotechnology Laboratory at CSU, and Dr. Huntington Potter, who is the expert in Colorado and nationwide on Alzheimer's research. I would encourage you to come and join us in room 356 upon adjournment. Thank you.
Further announcements? Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn to 9 a.m. Tuesday, March 8th.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate will be adjourned until 9 a.m. March 8th.